All right, in today's video, we're going to talk about reflections of linear functions. Okay, and there's two ways we're going to reflect. We're going to reflect over the x-axis or over the y-axis. So the x-axis is going to be the horizontal axis, and the y-axis is the vertical. All right, so let's look at this. If we have y equaling to f of x, all right, so if y equals, let's just say y equals 0, okay? F of x will equal to 0 because y equals f of x. Now we want to try to take the opposite of f of x, and the opposite of 0 is just 0. So that one doesn't really help us too much, but it's important to know what happens at 0. So let's look at the next one. What happens when y is 1? If y is 1, then f of x would be 1. And then the opposite of f of x would be negative 1. So what happens is this. If this is our graph, f of x, our function, we have 0 and we have 1. Now, what happens when we have negative f of x? That this value actually is going to go down here. And we already had 0. So the 0 repeats, and then we have negative 1. All right, let's try 2. So if y equals 2, f of x equals 2, and negative f of x would be negative 2. So what ends up happening in this case is this original graph, f of x, if we take the opposite of f of x, we'll reflect it over the x-axis. So anytime there's a negative outside of the function, f of x or g of x or h of x, it is going to reflect it over the x-axis. All right, so and that's what we show up here. So let's do over the y-axis. Now, in this case, the negative is going to happen inside the parentheses in front of the x value. Okay, so if we have x is 0, negative x is 0, and f of negative x would be 0, so f of 0. Right, so our first point would be here. Again, this one is maybe a little confusing, but it's important to know what's happening. So now, if I have x is 1, the opposite of x would be negative 1. And then f of negative 1 is going to go this way. Okay, so that would be f of negative 1. Why? Because the x value now is negative 1. So what will happen in this case, we can do the same thing for 2. So f of negative 2 in this case is going to move the graph this way. And so now we see our reflection over the y-axis. So again, if the negative sign is in front of the function, we go over the x. If the negative sign is in the parentheses, we're going over the y-axis. So keep this in mind as you guys do your reflections of linear functions.